everyone, my name is Adam Shawwalker. Welcome back to On the Flip Side. It's time for a review of this new Health album, DISCO4 Part 2. This is the sequel to DISCO4 Part 1, a record released back in 2020. It was a collection of songs that were a little bit inconsistent in quality and kind of all over the place with some various features that all made sense on paper but didn't always pan out in a way that felt cohesive. So now we have this second part to this album that now feels a little removed, a little bit past the point where it makes sense to have this album title, past the fact that this second part just only makes the same mistakes as the first part. And this whole thing is kind of giving me some crazy deja vu, like Health is kind of heading into the direction of Gorillaz, like this is kind of just a harder industrial IDM style version of Humans, at least at its most basic concept. And it's definitely not to say that there isn't good material here, but there is just so much inconsistency that it's hard to figure out why two parts of this album was needed in the first place. As far as the good tracks go, Dead Flowers with Poppy is an excellent album opener, great mood setting track. Not really much of anything going on here that couldn't have been done without Poppy though. She sounds good on this song, but ultimately adds so little to the track that giving her a feature really seems generous. Isn't Everyone featuring Nine Inch Nails is probably one of the best cuts on the record. Trent Reznor is really focused in on this very downward spiral era sound that he is trying to channel, not only in his delivery but also in his lyrics, which are very reminiscent of that mid to late 90s sound. So sort of downward spiral, a little bit of the Fragile even. It is kind of interesting too that the late era Nine Inch Nails production kind of bleeds into this track. Like Trent Reznor's vocals are as watery and washed out as any of the vocals on the past few Nine Inch Nails releases. It's actually one of my only complaints about the song. It does at least add another dimension of depth when the song chorus comes out and there's this very clear layer of noise that Trent's vocals dwell within. I'm also loving these very Reptile-Esque guitar swells that really make this song feel like it could be an outtake from like further down the spiral. As for the other pretty top-notch tracks here, Identity is pretty good, landing on a post-punk heavy dark wave sound. Add 1000 ends up being a really cool, almost death industrial track that sounds incredibly similar to some of the more recent Pharmacon stuff. If you listen to the track Body Betrays Itself off of Bestial Burden, you will absolutely get what I mean here too. Really the only other great track on this album is the cover of Perturbator's Excess, which is well done but feels kind of like a cop-out. It is also a little weird that there is only one song on this album that doesn't have any features linked to it, which is the last track, These Days 2021, which is fine. It's very middle of the road for the material that is on this album, but it just backs up my feelings about this being a collected work of songs meant for features. And obviously Health are absolutely no strangers to having features. A lot of the previous disco albums have had a decent amount of features, but DISCO4 Parts 1 and 2 each only have one track that is just a Health song. So this whole suite of tracks feels like a drag most of the time with how inconsistent it ends up being. Obviously inconsistency isn't always the worst thing, especially in the instance of a single versus an album, but this is two albums worth of material that ends up being about 90 minutes of clashing songs. And I really wouldn't say that there's many points on this album that are bad, with the exception of a couple of songs, most notably the Lamb of God feature Cold Blood, which features some of Randy Blythe's worst, most gung-ho, this is heavy, right guys, vocals. The intro for the track is actually fine. I've always thought Randy Blythe had a knack for these spoken word segments, but I have no idea what they were going for with this song's production. I've never really been a big fan of the vocal work in Lamb of God's music, but I've never physically recoiled before when I've heard it. But this song is just such a disaster on the vocal end of things. Like instrumentally, it's fine, and that's to be expected. Lamb of God has always, to me, had an incredibly tight instrumental section. Like no hate on that. Really, any other bad parts of this album I would just call underwhelming. Like a lot of the second half of this album fits into this category, starting with Gnostic Flesh, Mortal Hell with a backwash and horror feature, which actually ends up being a lot less punk rap and horrorcore heavy than I would expect. Even still, this song ends up feeling a little bit underwritten, a little bit underproduced, which is kind of weird for a Health song. This beat is also just very one note, and the features end up feeling very phoned in. The Joy of Sect featuring Street Sects is on the better end of this sort of meh feeling, but it is still a pretty slow burn of a track. Still Breathing with Ecstasy feels like if you were to mix like an Ariel Pink song with Joy Division. It's pretty decent, but at 5.5 minutes long, this song just doesn't really do anything that keeps my attention past the first couple of minutes of the track. And the last lukewarm feature I think is really like The Neighborhood on No Escape, which really feels like a bit of a remix of a different song completely. Like the style details end up meshing fine here, but this song feels very out of place among a lot of these other tracks. Its inclusion here feels mostly like a courtesy to really meet that broad, there's a little something for everyone to love kind of blanket. And I do really like some of the tracks here, but this whole album's basic premise does not feel like it has strong enough legs to hold up. And the problem only gets worse when you bring into account the first part of this whole two-part album thing. And it also feels weird, like ever since 2015's Death Magic, it feels like Health have kind of backed themselves into a stylistic corner and have refused to venture out of it. I think that they've had a good thing in the past, but this lack of trying new things has really become a detriment at this point, and they're really gonna have to push themselves to move past this very stagnant creative period. DISCO4 Part 2 is an okay 4. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below, and if you liked this video, remember to subscribe and drop a like on the video, and if you want to help out further, check out my Instagram and my Reverb store. Links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.